Oh, that was a good bit of clapping. Hello, hello. How are we this evening? Oh, excellent. I can hear you. I can even see you out there. Brilliant. Let me just put all my bits and pieces down. Welcome to this very special, very important, I think, Wheeler Centre event presented with the wonderful Now or Never Festival, which launched this week. Today we are going to be charting the future, First Nations knowledges and artificial intelligence. To introduce myself, my name is Natasha Mitchell. I'm from ABC Radio National's Big Ideas program. Anyone know it? Excellent, that's what I want to hear. And I want to just let you know then that we are recording tonight. The Wheeler Centre is capturing tonight's event on video and audio. So we hope to broadcast it at some stage too. We are gathering today on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, who for more than 60,000 years now and counting forevermore, have created, have nurtured, have shared, have evolved, are evolving complex knowledge systems, including about humanity's ongoing, evolving, complex relationship with the tools and technology that we create. And so that conversation is really continuing here tonight. It is going to be an hour of power, let me tell you. We are right in the thick of a new colonising land grab of sorts, one that is hungry for all of the knowledge, all of the data accumulated in the world so far and across all of time. Its algorithms are pillaging the work, borrowing. Is it pillaging? Is it stealing? Is it looting? Perhaps you've got a view on that. The work of artists and authors and scholars without their consent. It's doing the work of humans by taking the work of humans. But I think many of you will also recognise that AI is this incredible tool of our times. It's helping us in all sorts of ways. It can help us process and understand and make sense of the patterns in enormous amounts of data. So that might influence things like medical diagnoses and healthcare systems, or our understanding of the global climate and how it's changing. It can help us make or support our decision making. So it's a really interesting time that we're in, but it's also riddled with, as we'll hear today, racism and biases and blindnesses, and using it takes masses of resources and energy and land. What will it take to disrupt the who, the what, and the why of AI is what we're asking tonight. What will it take to create a more ethical, a more life-affirming, a more planet-centred approach to artificial intelligence? And how can First Nations peoples drive it rather than be policed by it, punished by it, misrepresented by it and rendered invisible by it? So I think all of these themes are going to come up tonight. They're juicy, they're meaty, and we are very much looking forward to you participating as well. There's going to be a QR code up there. You all know the Slido dance. You can either go to the QR code or slido.com and pop the code in, and that's your way of asking questions tonight, and I'll see them pop up on this iPad. So don't hold back. We want to hear from you. We're going to allow a little bit of time to get to you for questions as well. Let me introduce our power couple tonight, our power collaborators. On screen, joining us from Canberra is Jessica Russ-Smith, who's a Wiradjuri Wamble woman. Welcome, Jess.
Hi everyone, how you going?
Can we hear you? Yeah. Give you a sense of the room. Jess is an Associate Professor of Social Work and also the Chair of the Indigenous Research Ethics Advisory Panel at the Australian Catholic University. She recently served as the elected non-executive director of the Australian Association of Social Workers. Her work focuses on Indigenous sovereignty, on decolonising higher ed, education and allied health, critical disability justice and artificial intelligence. What a great thing to have a social work scholar in this conversation on artificial intelligence, and her leadership in education has been acknowledged through the Australian University Teaching Awards, as has the teaching excellence of our next guest here that I'd like to introduce to you. Michelle Lazarus is a professor and director of what's called the Centre for Human Anatomy Education and Deputy Director of the Centre for Scholarship in Health Education, both at Monash University. And her first book was called The Uncertainty Effect, How to Survive and Thrive Through the Unexpected, which is what we're doing now. But together they came and have co-written a book that you'll be able to get via a QR code for free. It's called, and I highly recommend it to you, it's called The AI Revolution, Valuing Country, Culture and Community in a World of Algorithms. And we'll let you know that QR code on a sheet of paper as you exit tonight. Please give our guests a big welcome. You've got your fan club in the room, you two. I guess I want to start with both of you. You met at an event, which we'll come to a bit later, looking at artificial intelligence and First Nations data sovereignty, which is an interesting concept in itself. But from this came this beautiful friendship and this academic collaboration, and also a vision for a more life-centred AI. So I'm interested in each of your perspectives now, to kick off, on what you see humanity is facing right now, how you see this as a fork in the road moment in terms of our relationship to artificial intelligence. I'll start with you, Jess, on screen.
Yiridumarang, Baladu Digigal Raju Yina, Smith Bull McGuinness Bull, Bangdongo Nanawa Main Bull Nurmumbu. Hello everyone, my name is Jess. I'm a sovereign Wiradjuri Wamble woman and come from a strong matriarchy of Smith and McGuinness women. And I also just want to start by acknowledging the sovereign unceded land of the Ngunnawal peoples and country where I am joining you from tonight. I'm very grateful to be joining online. What a cracker question to open with, Natasha. And, you know, sometimes I think about, are we at a crossroads, or are we just continuing at a tipping point of humanity? And by that, I mean, we just continue to see humans destroy each other, destroy country. Is AI just the next chapter in that story? I don't think it has to be. But as opposed to a fork in the road, I think it's that continuation, and that where we are now is exactly connected to where we've been for a very long time as humans.
I want to explore that more with you in a moment. What about you, Michelle? Is this a fork in the road moment when it comes to AI?
I think what you'll hear is our worldviews, because of our cultures, might be slightly different. So I think that we can say, from my perspective, probably a fork in the road. I view AI as sort of the mirror on the wall, because I think some of the headlines that came early when ChatGPT, so large language models, came into the public sphere was more about the bias. How can it be so racist? And in reality, it's us that are creating that bias. So I think what it is shining a light on who we always have been in a way that we just haven't considered before.
So putting the human back into the artificial.
Yeah, and seeing what we've done, to Jess's earlier point of the bias, the racism, it's always been there. We just haven't looked at it in this way before.
How do you think life will be redefined by AI, Michelle?
Ooh, that's another big question. So I think we're seeing it manifest in a variety of ways. I mean, we're seeing the impact on climate change. That's been in the news recently. We're seeing the impact on people being harmed by AI. Some people find it to be more useful and efficient, but I would argue, for instance, we're told AI will help you do the menial tasks, but we're working harder, longer hours. We now have laws to prevent that. So is it really making us more efficient? I don't think so. So I think we're starting to ask ourselves, what is the point of life, and what makes life worth living, is where I think artificial intelligence has had us questioning.
You're quick, though, at the outset of this collaborative book that you've written together to say, hey, we're not Luddites.
Yeah.
Why was that important for you to make clear?
I think because when we call into question, I think the headlines that a lot of for-profit companies have you believe about artificial intelligence, they've been much more pervasive than I think the reality of what AI can do and has done for us. And so people buy into that narrative. And so when you challenge the idea that AI isn't going to bring us all the glory, all the gold, all the efficiencies, you're perceived in the bag of, they've done the narrative very well, you're against AI. And so I think that's the narrative that's been portrayed to build up the AI field.
So are you against AI?
No, I'm not against AI. I use it, especially for challenging like feedback type of commentary, so it's not too direct. I tend to be American and very direct, and I've learned
you use
that's
AI to soften your feedback.
I do.
To
I
students.
use it to not necessarily to students, but to colleagues. Sorry, because I am aware that it's not socially acceptable to be so direct. So I absolutely use it, but I'm much more cautious. In fact, we were just editing an application for an award, my colleague and I, and she said to me, I don't want to get dumb. We're going to do the thing first. We're going to edit the application, and then we'll use AI to cut words. So there are stages that it can be used, but I think it's making more and more people are starting to reevaluate when and how they use it. And I think that's all that Jess and I are asking is when and how, and is there a different version that we can use?
Okay, let's find out more. Jessica, you know, the conversation about artificial intelligence at the moment is you've got to keep up. It's all new. Stay at the front, stay at the front of it all. Otherwise you'll be left behind. You make a very strong case that there is nothing new and in fact there is nothing artificial about artificial intelligence. Explain that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where I can really connect with my Wiradjuri ways of knowing, being, and doing. So I said before, I'm a sovereign Wiradjuri Womble woman, which means my nation is Wiradjuri and my family are from the Womble, the Macquarie River. And the ways that I have grown up and the culture that has been shared with me is this key concept called Wayana, which means transformation, in that everything transforms. I transform from a baby to an adolescent to an adult. I look different or I express myself differently, but I'm still me. And in the book and in our analyses, Michelle and I apply Wayana to AI. AI is not something new. It is just the latest expression of technology. It is just as much the internet, the smartphone, the railroad, and axe that were used to chop wood. These are all technologies and tools. They just develop and advance over time for different purposes. And I think that's really important when we're talking about AI, because particularly in the modern day world, where we're so capitalist driven, where we're so obsessed with technology and data and things being so instant and quick. And I am absolutely someone who subscribes to that lifestyle in many ways. But when we are expecting this newness all the time, we disconnect from the past. But the past actually tells us exactly where we are going with AI or where we could go. So it's not new, it's just something that's transformed. Another example I like to draw on to describe here is in Wiradjuri, the word for table is actually the same word for tree, maran. So the tree transforms to make the table. The table is something very different to the tree, but it's actually just a different expression. The table's not new in the sense that it just started to exist. It's always connected to country, and that's how I like to think of AI.
So, but you take it back even further. You take AI back to the beginning of the cosmos. I mean, back to the beginning of creation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I also want to say really clearly, I'm not a coder. I'm not a tech person by any means. I have to regularly ask my husband to help me with a basic spreadsheet. I don't have that knowledge. But what I do have an understanding of is this idea of knowledge and data. And data is sometimes just a fancier word or a shorter word for knowledge. And knowing has always existed in the world, and how we as humans interact with that knowing, use that knowing to do things, to create things, to complete things, is the exact same we're doing with AI. It's just another way of filtering and using knowledge, but knowledge has always existed.
How does that perspective then change our relationship to AI now, do you think? That thinking of AI in the deep context of time?
Yes, for me, and I think this comes down to seeing AI, and perhaps this links back to what you were saying before, Natasha, about it. You know, it's the big, new, shiny, exciting tech thing. But when I define AI, I think about it as a sweeping of the dust and the knowledge that we bring together. And I break this down in the book. But this is about this understanding of artificial intelligence being just as much a part of life. It's not fake, it's very real. And in fact, we need to see it as a being that we are in relationship to, and that is in relationship to us. So for me, that relationality and seeing AI as a being, as a thing that we need to respect, and that we also need to train to respect us a lot better, is really important. Because when we have technology as this detached, objective thing and not a relational being, we're actually moving away from the very core of who we are as humans, which is built in relationships.
So we lose our own humanity. That's so interesting, because I spoke to a Hawaiian scholar some years ago, and they'd been exploring the idea of machines as kin. You know, this idea of kinship, that we have kinship to other people, but we also have kinship to other objects in the world, like rivers and rocks and trees and mountains. How do you view that idea that if we view machines, the machines of our own creation, as our kin, that then somehow mirrors back on recognising our own humanity and our own human involvement in creating those technologies?
And I love that way of considering technology, machine as kin. And that's how I see AI as well. It's probably why I always write please and thank you when I'm working with Claude to help me develop teaching materials. But it's that relationality.
Well, who's Claude?
That's it.
Claude AI is another
large
LLM
language model.
There
AI
you go.
program.
Right. Yep. I haven't used that one. You have in the
It's
audience, obviously.
fantastic. And
So you're
and again,
polite.
it's
You're
about
polite
that
to your
relationality.
AI.
Sorry,
You're polite to your AI.
It's an interesting.
I am.
It's an interesting example, because
Michelle.
we're polite to it because that's our culture, but that's actually costing a huge amount of energy every time we say please and thank you. But we've created it as part of, I think what Jess has said is really important, is we view it as a relationship with ourselves. And yeah, it's a really interesting perspective.
Michelle, you have always been an early adopter way back. Even as a child, you were
Yeah.
right there at the frontier of all sorts of new technology. You use technology in your work, but you've had a really radical rethink, haven't you?
I have.
So talk us through that, and then how this relationship came to be, because it was around data sovereignty, this idea of data sovereignty, wasn't it?
It was. I will answer the first part and then move to the second. So the first part was focusing on how I transitioned from being so. So we always had the newest and brightest and biggest technology in our house. It was just like whatever came out we had to have it. So I think I wrote about it in the book. But we had the first CD holder, and then the 5 CD holder, and then the TVs got thinner, and the phones got bigger, and then smaller, and then bigger again. But whatever it was, we had the biggest. I think what started happening is that there was a transition, I guess. You get burnt out at work, and you're sort of reflecting on the purpose of life, and you start to realize that the fact that emails can't turn off, that technology is always with you, and it's always sort of prodding you to work harder, do better, be bigger. Questioning that, and then learning more about our propensity to trust the technology when we shouldn't. All of that combined led me to start to just think critically about when and how I use technology. And so I think the biggest epiphany came when I started learning more about artificial intelligence, how it was being sold to us, and the toll it was taking on the climate and on ourselves and how we function and interact with each other.
What disturbed you about it? Because I guess, and this is a good opportunity to talk about the biases that are built into artificial intelligence, not just in terms of the data that we're training it on, which is, you know, just as racist and sexist and prejudiced as all the information in the world that we're feeding it. But also the nature of the workforce who is creating AI, driving it.
Absolutely. And I think there's also our what's termed automation bias, our ability to trust it. And I think that intersection led me to really start to question that, because my primary focus is in healthcare. And when you put an AI system that's mostly converged with data sets that they've pulled from healthcare, it tends to be, for instance, they've done a fair amount of studies in the US where patients with kidney disease were provided an AI system, and certain patients were given support, other patients weren't, and it turned out it was based on race. And the reason why was because the data that was input and training the AI was showing we already were racist in our treatment, so we were providing more healthcare for white patients than black patients. And so the AI just did that. The challenge is, if it's one doctor doing that in a healthcare system, you're impacting 30 people, 50 people. When you build an AI system that goes out into every healthcare system across a country, you're now impacting entire populations. And so I think that terrified me. And the fact that doctors, we humans, all humans, have this propensity to trust what the AI says over our own intuition. And I think those two things combined, if you don't build in that healthy skepticism, can create real harm.
Yeah.
So,
and then you've had this collaboration,
Yes.
and there's a story to that.
yes, absolutely. So that's countered with the reality that technology is allowing us to have this conversation right now. Technology is how Jess and I met. We've only met in person, I think, once, maybe? Twice. Oh yeah, for the book launch too. So we've met in person twice, but we wrote an entire book using this platform. So we met because Jess did this amazing session on data sovereignty with a panel. And she asked this powerful question, and I will just state the question and then turn it over, Jess, to you. But she said, is AI a colonizer or a decolonizer? Is it representing the white heteronormative British perspective on the world or not? And of course, my reaction was, oh, it's absolutely a colonizer. And Jess challenged that view, because she said, for the first time, it's actually both. It can be decolonizing because it's stealing data, and we, who have been in the dominant culture, are experiencing what we've done to other people for generations.
So let me come to Jessica then in this conversation. So tell me about this, how you view the digital colonisation of that is happening under AI, but also the prospects for decolonisation.
Yeah, and thanks for reminiscing on that story of how we met, Michelle. I always love hearing that, because it's such a big part of this relationship with technology. There's a push and a pull. You know, technology is not neutral, nor are humans, and the way we use it can be really harmful, can also be incredible. To me, this links with that idea of AI is both a colonizer. It is someone that takes without asking permission. It is someone who takes to use that knowledge as a commodity, you know, ChatGPT or other forms of LLMs or more advanced kinds of AI. We're paying for the higher levels of that. That's capitalizing on knowledge that has been taken, right, from the web or wherever the training set, the data set is from. But at the same time, it's this decolonizer, or anti-colonizing is a common language as well. But decolonizing basically means undoing the colony. So reversing, pulling apart, critiquing colonization. And anti-colonialism is a direct action of not replicating or reproducing colonialism. And AI is really funny because it's really put a lot of white people in a space of discomfort where their knowledge is being taken without their permission. And that's where it's both a colonizer for even the colonizers, but it's also pushing this new power differential in societies, particularly settler colonial societies like Australia, the US, Canada, around who owns knowledge, who has the right to that. And if we think back to the history of so-called Australia, its 200-ish year history was invaded under the term of terra nullius, no man's land. AI is staking a similar flag of terra nullius in a lot of people's data and knowledge.
Oh, that's so interesting, isn't it? So it's making, in a sense, it's making people aware of the colonial forces of the past. Tell me about this idea of data sovereignty from a First Nations perspective. What is data sovereignty and why does it matter?
So data sovereignty relates to the governance, control, possession, access to Indigenous data by Indigenous communities. And there are some incredible leaders in Indigenous data sovereignty here and across the world, and a lot of work that I have learnt from. And it looks at this idea of Indigenous data, which is not just data about us, but it can include citizenship-based data, life expectancy data, and how that data is collected and used. And we see this a lot. There's a Palawa scholar, distinguished professor, Maggie Walter, who talks about how quantitative data about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, stats about us, are used to reproduce that narrative that Aboriginal people are broken, that Aboriginal people are the problem. That's actually not the case. We are the oldest surviving living culture in the world by tens of thousands of years. Our resilience, our resistance, and our strength is very evident. And data sovereignty really brings that to the centre, saying anything about us in relation to us, and that includes country, needs to be governed through a respectful way and framework that connects with First Nations cultures.
So what does that mean for how we think about AI? Because AI systems are being used in policing, in banking, in law enforcement, in all sorts of ways to limit people's access to loans, to identify their faces in a crowd, to punish them, to make sentencing decisions and around risk of recidivism, all sorts of stuff. And that inevitably has a racist bent to it, doesn't it, Jez?
Absolutely. And this is where we can see that, you know, sometimes people talk about AI and, oh, the risk that it might pose. The harm, the violence has already happened and it's continuing to happen. And this is also where Indigenous data governance, because again, it comes from the oldest living surviving culture in the world. There's obviously something right about it. We've nearly destroyed this country in 200 years. Let's talk to the old people who know how to look after the land and knowledge. And we see that in Indigenous-led AI programs. There's one called SCOBOT. It's from Native Nations in the US. It's completely First Nations-led. It's this adorable little robot about this size, if anyone, maybe the size of my head or so, that Indigenous youth are using to revitalise language. And they're talking to the robot and the robot is learning the language and it's sharing it back with them. That was developed by First Nations people. The data is held by First Nations people. The use of the data and the AI is determined by that First Nations community. The way that it was built and developed is all through sustainable means. That's where we see governance of data, respect for data, a relationality, a relationship with data being centered. And we can really learn from that with AI or really any form of technology.
Yes, that's so interesting. So it's not casting this massive wide net, it's actually curating the data that goes into the system. Michelle?
And I think it could be a model for how all communities use AI, because your idea about recidivism, I was at an AI talk and it was a technology person who was giving the talk and said, oh, we have this amazing AI tech that can predict return to jail. And then he said that his prediction was an 80% accuracy. And anyone in the audience, yeah, that gasp is exactly what my response was. Because if you aren't in technology, if you're in ethics, if you're in humanities, that is not an adequate number. Those are individuals that are being labeled inappropriately. And to what extent we, as not necessarily people who are coding AI or developing AI, are involved with this conversation directly impacts those types of activities. So what Jess is talking about is that material, community, et cetera, was all involved with the development, data collection, how the AI runs. Everybody was involved. It wasn't just a small group of people who think they understand the context. So in that case, to what extent you get people who are in jail, who are running jails, are involved with from the beginning, I think could impact all of us. So maybe the future of AI is that locally developed, contextually relevant artificial intelligence, not one size. Because it is just colonization all over again if you're just taking one technology, one company, and putting it out everywhere.
What have you seen as the most egregious examples of AI bias?
Whew, there's just so many to choose from. I think the stuff coming out of the healthcare system, I mean, it's my field, out of the US is shocking. I think we write about this too in the book about lending practices in the US. They are using data that they know is flawed and continuing to perpetuate it, which is leading to sustained suppression of certain communities so that it's a racist activity to buy a house basically now, because they don't have the scores needed to get the mortgage to be able to buy the house, and it just perpetuates for generations.
You talk about double discrimination going on.
Yeah. In what context, sorry?
Well, I mean, it came up in the book that people are discriminated against and then they encounter these systems that further discriminate and compound the discrimination.
It almost just becomes the tool to perpetuate the discrimination. So the example of the housing situation, there are plenty of already racist practices in certain parts of the US, so they're actively trying to not let Black people into the white community. Then they can blame the FICO, the mortgage score, the score that you have to get a mortgage. Oh, it's not us, it's the mortgage, because the technology itself is built on the data, and then it's treated as an objective source of information, but at its stem, it's just a coded word for the same racism that led to the problem.
Although you do talk about the possibility that AI could solve racism. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But that it could actually detect and raise our awareness about discriminating practices. Give us some examples of how that would work.
So the question, we can use the housing one as to continue that. For instance, if somebody, instead of using that as fact, okay, this person shouldn't get a mortgage, they could look at the data and go, why aren't we lending as much to this group of people? And use the data to sort of pull out where the racism, where the bias in the data exists. So instead of using the data to tell them what to do, it would more pull out the trends that are leading to certain populations getting mortgages, other populations not. Or in the kidney example earlier, who was getting treatment, just a human to look over it and go, why does it keep recommending that this population get the highest level of support and this population not? And so to ask questions of the data as opposed to take the data's recommendation, to take the AI's recommendation. So the recommendation becomes the source of the next question instead of the outcome.
Jessica, you're both really advocating for a more life-centred AI. What does that look and feel like to you?
Yeah, that's a big question as well. And again, it comes back to that idea of what does it look like locally? And what it looks like for me is connected to who I am, where I grew up, who my ancestors are, where I live now, my values. We can't remove the human from what a life-centered AI looks like. But I think what it can do, instead of having a human-centered AI, it's a reframe. Similar to what Michelle was just talking about. And it doesn't even have to be AI to do this. We saw this a lot during the Voice referendum that greatly harmed First Nations communities. There was constant trauma porn basically about Aboriginal communities around how poor we are, how much we struggle, but without a context. And I saw some really great critical reframings of that, talking about, are Indigenous people actually more likely to commit a crime, or are white people more likely to arrest us?
Exactly.
Are Indigenous kids more likely to be in care, or are Indigenous parents seen as being less able to care for their children by white systems, and how that is reperpetuated? And that reframing is needed as well when we think of a life-centered AI instead of a human-centered AI. And this is where First Nations knowledge is. Again, I speak from a Wiradjuri Womble standpoint. So different nations, different cultures have different understandings. There can be a strong commonality around the importance of relationality in First Nations cultures across the world. And that sees that when we center country and land, everything else actually gets centered and cared for with it. And this is what we talk about both in the book and the many conversations and fiery debates Michelle and I probably have with many people around artificial intelligence or any form of tool that can be oppressive or disruptive in a positive way, is thinking about so much of the conversation around artificial intelligence is about what do I get out of it as a person? What do I win? As opposed to what does someone else lose? People are losing their lives because AI is being used to use drones and kill innocent families and children. Again, is my development of a university teaching plan really worth someone else's life? Absolutely not. But the way that we use AI is about me, and that further reproduces the capitalist in society. When we shift to life-centered, we think first about country and our future generations, not ourselves. One of the things that I've always been taught to ask is, what kind of ancestor do I want to be, as opposed to what do I want in my life right now? And that's what life-centered AI is about.
Yeah, so this idea of our relationship to country being so central. You are of country, you are in country, you are part of country. Country is you and you are country. AI is presenting a major challenge to country, is it not? Through use of land, those big energy-hungry, water-hungry servers that are being used to power AI systems, ChatGPT around the world. So how do you see that challenge? It's exploitative of country.
Absolutely. It's a deep ethical reproduced colonial violence of country. And there's a level of probably both irony and hypocrisy in using AI to try and solve the problems that we have created. And we're reproducing the problems through using those programs to find the answers a lot of the time. And how do we start to center country? What does that look like? Sustainable energy is one part of that. But even so much of sustainable energy is problematic. Electric cars, the batteries, the lithium or the other forms of materials that are used for that battery are mined, particularly by Black, Indigenous and people of colour who are underpaid, who are completely exploited for someone else to feel like they're being having a positive impact on the environment. And that's where we really, for Michelle and I, it's about thinking about the local. What's the impact here, as opposed to developing this program one size fits all that we can just apply anywhere? Because when we do it like that, we're doing it at the expense of country. And as soon as we destroy this land, we will be no more. So the future we are creating is actually erasing us from its chapters.
Michelle, how do you see that challenge? And the electric vehicle is the prime example.
Yeah.
Mobile phone's the other, where you've got children in the Congo mining a particular heavy metal that goes into EV batteries, electric vehicle batteries.
Yep.
And but that makes everyone having their Teslas and their EVs makes them feel great and virtuous,
Exactly.
but they're exploiting child labour.
And I think it's the same thing is repeated with AI and the mechanical Turks and the people who do the human side of AI. So
Just explain the mechanical
Yep.
Turks concept, because not everyone knows who they are. And,
Yeah.
and we're talking about a mass workforce.
So Mechanical Turks is a play on the original chess game. This guy went around multiple countries, this is many moons ago, and said that he had an automated chess machine and anybody could play against this chess machine. And he was Turkish. So it was this mechanical Turkish chess machine, and people would pay money to play this. Totally automated. And then one day at one of these festivals, somebody realized there was a human inside the machine moving all the chess pieces. So that's what these people are named after, is that Mechanical Turks is an homage to the fact that we call it artificial intelligence, but hundreds and hundreds of humans are needed to evaluate the data so that when you type a question into ChatGPT, that it doesn't come back with something offensive or something, well, it does make stuff up, but something offensive. It's reviewing what's going into it. So people are typing some horrendous questions. At the other end is a human looking at those sometimes catastrophically unethical or damaging pictures, illustrations, stories, like some of the most horrific things that you can imagine. and they're paid pennies on the dollar, if at all, with no psychological support. So even here, if we have police that are dealing with child abuse, they get emotional support, psychological support. They're getting none of that. So there's all these humans, just like we heard about the mining, who are being harmed by AI. And I
massively disenfranchised
massively,
workforce.
yeah,
And traumatised.
absolutely. And I think when we think of what Jess is talking about and what your question relates to is the idea that I think we sort of almost need to start again from a different question and ask ourselves, how do I make artificial intelligence that's responsible to life? Because right now, artificial intelligence, it's like, what's the goal? The goal seems to be focused on making it more efficient, to build more equity, build more capital, et cetera. It's not to be responsible. Because if you were being responsible, you wouldn't be doing these harms to people, to the country, to ourselves. So I think if we ask those questions at the beginning instead of after, we're trying to take artificial intelligence that is already causing all of that harm, already doing that damage, and then retrofit it. I think it needs to start from the beginning with an ethicist, with people involved in the community to develop it from the ground up.
So have that conversation with big tech.
Yeah.
And let's look at those companies. So,
Yeah.
you know, Google sacked its ethics team.
They did.
or key components of its ethics team.
Yep.
Including a leading Black American woman.
Yep.
Timnit Gebru. You know, a travesty, really.
Yep.
And often, you know, ethics and social impact are kind of at the long end of a long chain of technical development.
Yeah.
Is ethics a conversation that the tech giants are having enough?
No, and then I could hear my colleague who's studies anti-racism, and she would ask, well, why would they want to, right? Because they're earning capital, they're building their business. So I think that's where I ask all of us to make that decision. Like, we need to be more engaged in resisting that technology until they make the decision. Because even there are laws that are changing around the use of AI and what is ethically responsible, but nobody's been prosecuted with these laws, and they're not sure they're going to apply.
It feels pretty toothless. It feels
does.
like AI is being done to us rather than us going, okay, well, what would we want AI to look and feel like? How do we want it to serve all of life on this planet? Because it's not just humans we're talking about here.
Exactly.
We're talking about all life forms, aren't we, Jessica?
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I think it's about considering ourselves, whether we're big tech, whether we're a user of AI, whatever our role is in the world. And again, this comes from how I was raised as a Wiradjuri woman, is positioning myself and knowing myself as a custodian, a carer for knowledge and a carer for others. And when that question comes first, it can really help change the narrative, change the development. But so much of our world is not about being custodians. It's about getting the most out of someone else.
Indeed. And I want to come to questions now, but I just want to say you both put forward then 3 fabulous R's. R for resistance, R for relationships, and R for reflection. Michelle, do you want to add anything about that?
I think that is what we're advocating for here, is that we want to create AI that's local. I think I would be encouraging everybody to be moving towards, and there are, I know Monash University has its own AI that it's developing, where we use some of it in our research that's local. So making it relational, what we choose, using that first R, resistance, to not choose those big tech companies because of all of the elements that we're discussing.
But they're everywhere.
They are everywhere, and we do discuss
They're ubiquitous.
They are, and I try to avoid the yes, I approve every time I do an update on the phone, because they take all your data. But really, you can't really, how do I say that? We write a phrase in the book that you can't really engage in life anymore unless you're part of that element. So then the reflective piece comes in. When and how you choose to use it is really important. So asking your question, do I need it right now? Do I need to say please and thank you every time? Do I need to use it from the beginning, or can I use it more towards the end? So I think those are the 3 R's for me.
Jessica, what does resistance look like for you in this AI conversation?
Resistance with AI can be both being vocal and saying no to the use of AI. It can be publishing books, marches, anything that is those kind of protest types of resistance to artificial intelligence, and particularly its use in oppressive ways. But for me, the 3 R's is also about slowing down and resisting that rushing. How do we solve this problem? How do I do this ethically? How do I do this? I need a 10-step plan. Slow down first, go slowly, go gently, because that's actually how we can be relational with knowledge and be that custodian again and put those 3 R's into practice.
That's a great point. I'd love to come to the flood of questions coming in now.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for posting your questions. I wonder if we could have the lights up a little bit so we can see you. Is that a possibility? Anyway, if that's possible, it'd be lovely to see your faces. So you're upvoting different questions. I'll try and get through as many as we can, and there's overlap obviously through some of them, so I might cluster a few of them. But one of you has asked, how can non-Indigenous people working in data and AI contexts uplift Indigenous data sovereignty, including influence, negotiation, representation towards such models? Jessica.
Who asked that question? That's a fantastic question. I love that. It's particularly, asking those questions, being resistive in the process, which so often doesn't ask about governance, doesn't ask about ethics or whose ethics, being very vocal in that space. And sometimes that actually means saying no to certain things. I think about this a lot I'll use an example in the research space because that's where I sit, and I chair the Indigenous Research Ethics Advisory Panel at ACU. So any research relative to First Nations communities comes through our panel for review. And many non-Indigenous colleagues are preparing those applications. And a big part of that is thinking about what is your role and your place when it comes to Indigenous knowledges. You can't claim those knowledges, nor can you produce them, but you can learn from them and start to decolonize, or rather be anti-colonial to those systems that seek to eradicate Indigenous data sovereignty and further harm our communities.
So I'll go for it, Michelle.
Jess, would an element be too about where the data sits and who owns it and how it gets used after that AI is developed? Because I think currently AI systems hold on to the data and then use it to train different things and different elements to do not necessarily what it was intended to do the first time. How would that be different?
So you need multiple stages of consent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
And as well in that, thinking about, well, where does the data have to be stored? Does it have to be stored? Are there questions built into that programming that say, is this cultural knowledge? Can I embed this back into the data training set or not? What's the law here for me as a program or for the person doing the program? Those really practical questions. And so many of the answers will actually be no, which is quite the opposite of what the history and contemporary reality of society and AI is. It's take and take and take, whereas part of this is saying, no, what's my place and what does this look like practically, whether it's about where the data is stored, do community have access to it? Are you really just designing up an AI program about Indigenous people, or does that come from the community and is that owned by the community?
We need all engineering students in this room tonight. I can tell you that now. Having done an engineering degree, I would love all students to hear this. So I'm going to cluster a few questions together. One is asking, how can we best use Indigenous knowledge systems to guide AI? There's a few that are connected. Let me just see. I'll link it with this one as well. If we can teach AI, don't we have an opportunity to rewrite and revitalise Indigenous cultures? Any thoughts on either of those?
Yes, I was just going to say in terms of that guiding AI and how we use what's the rules and what's the ethics around non-Indigenous people and Indigenous knowledges, that comes down to the elders of that community and their leaders telling you what that is and what that is not. And if you are using Indigenous knowledges without explicit permission or without citing that, and I don't just mean in a formal academic sense, I mean acknowledging the relationship of how you came to know that data, you are automatically pulling that data, that knowledge out of its context and colonizing it. So that relationship, again, coming back to Indigenous data governance that is determined by the community is really important.
And then the other question was, if we can teach AI, is that an opportunity to revitalise Indigenous cultures?
I think, Natasha, I think the framing of that is interesting. It's for Indigenous communities to revitalise or reclaim our cultures, and we do this because we are still here despite everything that has been thrown at us. But I think in terms of the non-Indigenous community and the wider communities, how can you use AI as a colonizer of the colonizer to disrupt is really important. And a flow-on effect from that would be supporting Indigenous communities and cultures. But again, that role of what is your knowledge and what is not is really important in this space. And AI often doesn't know how to determine that, and humans need to get better at that.
And I think from what I understand, Jess, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's also about asking whether you are meant to know that information now at this moment in time, because I feel like we almost have this belief that we are all entitled to all information across the world because we exist.
Yeah,
and that's not an Indigenous Wiradjuri perspective, from what I understand. It's like you're allowed to come to know that knowledge when it's time for you to come to know that knowledge. And AI creates the situation where we all of a sudden have access to this information we may not truly belong to, or it's not time for us to know.
So there are cultural protocols around knowledge keepers, how it's shared, when it's shared, Jess.
Absolutely. And that links back to that idea of being relational with knowledge and that role of the custodian. Whose role is it? Michelle, I love that you talked about that. Yes, in Wiradjuri culture, all knowledge, all knowing in the world, it already exists.
Yep.
It just becomes seen to us when we are ready. And I love that about my culture.
Other questions. One that was related. Where are we? I'll grab a few. What are your thoughts around AI-generated images, particularly of mob, for medical education purposes?
Oh, so many thoughts. Okay.
Michelle.
So I think images, well, Jess, actually, maybe, do you want to comment on taking images of the mob in general, and then I can comment on healthcare? Do you want to? Yeah.
Jess.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? This makes me think of simulation learning. And
exactly.
Sorry, Michelle, I said I'd hand back to you for the healthcare, but I'm thinking about,
fine.
Particularly in training nursing and medical students, they might be using mannequins. And the introductions of mannequins with darker skin was groundbreaking in so many spaces, right? Because historically, all the mannequins were white, and that made identifying particular illnesses more difficult for doctors because they didn't understand what that would look like on a Black person's skin. But at the same time, just having a Black mannequin doesn't necessarily make a difference. It's the context and the discussion around it. And I think that's the same with AI-generated images about culture, which I assume if you put into any kind of standard LLM, it would bring out dot painting. Dot painting's not from every Indigenous group and mob in the world, nor in settler colony Australia, right? But again, does it re-perpetuate those stereotypes, or might it actually produce some images that are quite disruptive to that stereotype? It's probably both.
Michelle.
And I think the challenge is that AI is super good at what it does. It mimics us very well. And so the only people that really can tell when it's giving us inappropriate information or false information is the expert who doesn't need the AI. So who are you to type in, the mob and then be able to evaluate whether it's actually a racist image that's coming out back at you? The only people who could do that are the community within which it's based on, with expertise. Like, you need expertise to evaluate whether the AI is accurate, really, at this stage.
So someone else has asked, is it silly to think that loading Indigenous perspectives and knowledge into a large language model, an LLM, will help reduce its bias? Is it important to be in there?
So large language models are a statistical model, so they're always working towards the median, right? So they're going to average that information and potentially perpetuate the idea that all indigenous cultures are the same, then merge that with the other data it's got. There are parameters you can put into it, but it is, there was something else that popped into my head, but I think the statistical element of that makes it dangerous. Oh, it was about knowing. And indigenous knowledges, we write about this in the book, and Jess, if you want to talk about the dancing, that would be lovely. But that understanding knowledge, and I would argue for all us as humans, is more than just the fact. So the example we put into the book is about Mary's room, and how if you have Mary and she's a scientist and she knows everything there is to know about science, anything imaginable. She lives in a black and white room, and she has studied the color, for instance, red. She understands the pixels that are in red, the wavelengths, how the brain interprets red, understands that there are certain elements in the world like tomatoes that are red, okay? But does she understand what red is? Then she leaves the black and white room and comes out and sees the color red. Is that the knowing, or is the reading about it the knowing? And so what AI can do is the black and white interpretation of red as opposed to the experiential interpretation of red. And when you think of those two elements in indigenous knowledges, where the context, the culture, the country, the experience is implicit, tied to inextricably the knowledge, inseparable, then I would argue that AI may never be able to, at this stage, claim it. What do you think, Jess? What are your...
Yeah, no, I love that, Michelle. And I guess it's for me, again, it's this way or it's that way, right? There's one perspective to look at that in, hey, do you know what? What if we flooded these LLMs with indigenous knowledges?
Yeah.
Would that change that statistical analysis?
Yes.
Still leans into the programming, still leans into the ones and O's of how it's programmed in the background.
And someone else has asked, how can First Nations people produce more data today for training the next big large language model tomorrow?
And this connects to it, but here's the other thing, right? We could flood an LLM. We could try and shift how it determines what is that median point of data that it will recommend to people asking a question. But just putting, so for example, if someone copied Wayana concept and just put the definition in, if they didn't note that that was a Wiradjuri concept, if they didn't note that many people have come to understand that because of language custodians in our communities and the elders who have led language reclamation in our communities, if they also don't put in a term of, no, you can't just claim this word and use it how you want, is it actually flooding with indigenous knowledges, or is it just recolonizing, reperpetuating, colonizing those knowledges?
Yeah.
Sami has written, it seems that the root cause of many AI-mediated harms is in capitalism and the incessant drive for profit-driven efficiency. Should we tackle primarily that? And I guess we've sort of touched on that, haven't we? Thoughts?
100%, yes. We've gotten into this discussion quite a bit because we keep coming back to that same single sentence that ultimately most of what we've come here, whether capitalism or colonialism is the superordinate here, the leader, I think we haven't determined. Jess, what do you think? We agree with the statement.
Yeah, I kind of see colonialism and white supremacy as that kind of broader thing, and capitalism is a
element, or like an avenue to
like a motion of that, right?
Yeah.
And how it's put into place. But you know, how do we disrupt capitalism in a world that is so dependent upon it, when, you know, in many ways Michelle and I would subscribe and reinforce capitalism in our day-to-day life, right? Because it's the system, it's the structural. But how do we start to navigate that? What's our role as individuals, and then as wider communities? Can we actually completely change that?
So we've got so many more questions and we've only got a minute left. So frustrating, isn't it? I love these questions so much, but I will ask this one. Bardi has asked, keeping up with latest findings on harm of AI on people and the planet feels like a ride on the Dunning-Kruger effect roller coaster. What gives you hope AI is worth it? Michelle?
Thanks. Let's see. I think the fact that we're having these conversations means it's worth it. We have not had these conversations at the scale and breadth prior to AI making it into the popular community. So I think that makes it worth it. And usually, as those pendulums swing, we end up with what we actually need. So I think that's what makes it worth it, the fact that we are having these critical discussions.
Jess?
Yeah, wow, that's a really powerful question. And I might flip it slightly. Whether it's worth it or not, in some ways is irrelevant because it is here and it is already disrupting, whether it's positive, negative, whatever that looks like. So for me, it's thinking about what is the future we are building with this technology now and how do I reshape that future? Because right now it is that Freddy Krueger roller coaster. And if we do not disrupt it, which is our responsibility to country and each other, we are erasing ourselves.
Whew. Huge, right? I'm just going to maybe ask this question finally, and that is, and you offered one example earlier, but do you have any examples of how we are using AI for good and also AI for good in the First Nations space? Michelle?
So I think there's a few examples where we're using AI because it is really good at some things, way better than our brains are, despite the energy differences. And one of those is seeing patterns. So we're using it to look at climate change. We're using it to track, for instance, the ozone layer and how it's recovering and in what ways. And then I'll turn over to Jess to add in some elements on how it's being used for First Nations.
Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier Scobot. Everyone Google it. It's so incredible, and the story of it. There are other examples where teenagers from the First Nations communities are being taught coding skills and computing skills, and they are developing programs we probably can't even comprehend at this point that will shift things for the better, that will protect their communities. So there are examples out there, but I also think there's a lot in the works that we are yet to see.
And I'm just going to weave these two in. Andrew says, I think we've covered almost all of your questions in the discussion, so I'm just going to give you both a pat on the back for that.
Okay.
Awesome. And thank you for your fantastic questions. Andrew says, what are some practices you adopt or would highly advise to set healthy boundaries with our consumption and understandings of AI? I think we've kind of covered that, but linked to that is how can we teach the younger generation to think more critically when it comes to AI?
So I think one of the things that we need in education are actual integration of AI where it's wrong. The biggest challenge to us assuming that the technology is correct is building in healthy skepticism, which I think we've illustrated Jess and I have in spades. So one of the ways, for instance, in healthcare that I'd love to do is a simulation where the doctor has a patient, they collect information, and AI is providing an output or a recommendation for next steps. And the student can actually decide, do I follow the AI or not? What they don't know is that the AI is absolutely wrong. And those types of opportunities, building those into the teaching where AI is part of the curriculum, but it's not always right, is really important, I think. And I think that's how I would build it in. We've started building it in a more regular basis with having students bring in what the AI said, and they notice it's wrong, and we're like, yes, that's what it does. So
Can I throw this one at you
Sure.
too? Someone's asked, technology leaders in AI talk about the next phase of AI, AGI, which is AI that is fully independent and can think for itself. How can ethics be introduced here?
Yeah, so first I'd ask if AGI is really that feasible. There's a lot that we have access to in terms of information input. So the ability to see, touch, feel, experience, the memory, all of that is influencing our ability to think and do things. So at this stage, AGI is not as close as some for-profit companies would like you to believe. So I think I'm hesitant or loath to answer that question because it's sort of adding
It's a fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
At least this stage. I could be wrong, but yeah.
Jess, a final message from you.
Yes, and actually with that, two things. With that, I think that brings us back to Wayana though, right? AGI, again, how realistic is it? How close is it? When we understand technology, AI in all its forms, as transformations of technology over time, when we learn how to be resistive, relational, and reflective with any form of technology, we can continue to apply that as AI transforms through time. And the other thing I just wanted to say, that point around, educating these younger generations. I think there's two parts of that for me. One is that we need to learn from the younger generations.
Yeah.
I would still like to class myself as a younger generation. I don't know, at 33. But particularly, the students that I teach challenge me in the classroom every day. And I love that. There is a lot for me to learn from them, and to not just think of myself because I'm older as a knower. I'm a learner in that space.
Brilliant.
And that connects me with the second point of that is we can't just keep talking about what we should do. We need to do it.
Yeah.
Enough of the talk. We need to walk ethically with AI.
But also, Jessica, don't we need to get the disciplines talking to each other more? We still
Yes.
quarantine the engineers, the technologists from the sociologists and the ethicists and the philosophers. And there's a kind of token sociologist in some of these tech companies. But, how do we actually get the silos talking to each other so that engineering students and computer scientists are having these conversations at the very day dot of their training?
So important, Natasha. And that comes back to that relationality, and for everyone to see and perceive data and acknowledge data as knowledge, as its own being first, before our disciplinary readings of that knowledge. That is how we should be connecting. My husband's an engineer. I'm a social worker. We are chalk and cheese in many ways, but so many of our conversations occur around this and come back to that idea of what is data, what is knowledge, and what's my responsibility to it.
There's actually been some, ironically, AI modeling on how do you build connections across disciplines. And you do, what Jess is saying is true, you need a connector. So there almost needs to be this third space, this pathway, this degree where you're the connector. You sort of take interdisciplinary courses and then you connect those disciplines.
So Caitlin in the audience has said, thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you to our two wonderful speakers, Jessica Russ-Smith, Michelle Lazarus, and their book is called The AI Revolution, Valuing Country, Culture and Community in a World of Algorithms. It's published at the moment by Monash University Publishing, but you can get it for free because it's a wholly digital book. There'll be a QR code that you get as you walk out, and I commend it to you and tell others about it as well. This has been a part of the Now or Never Festival. I want to thank the wonderful Wheeler Centre team for making this event happen, and the Now or Never Festival. Jess, especially for joining us. She couldn't be with us in person today, but we're so grateful that you made the time to be online. And Michelle, thank you so much for braving the weather to be here, as the case for all of you. We recorded tonight's event thanks to the support of the Wheeler Centre team, tech team here, who are just truly wonderful. And we look forward to bringing it to you on the ABC Radio National airwaves. In Melbourne, that's 6:21 a.m, but it's whole of nation and also podcast at any time on the ABC Listen app. The show is called Big Ideas, and it's been great having you here tonight. Thank you so much.